Welcome back. Let's get a reaction now to the SIU report on home affairs. We are joined by March and March's Jacinta Ngobese-Zuma and African Diaspora Network's Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. Very good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time. Dr. Sibanda, let's perhaps just start with you. I mean, the SIU report highlights extensive corruption that's involving foreign nationals and some diaspora communities. What's your reaction to this report?
Thank you very much. Good evening to yourself and the viewers. Look, it is a very worrying, kind of a situation. It is something that definitely, is that needs to be, looked at, very seriously, because, of course, what we know is that people that come from, different parts of the country look at South Africa as, a favorable, preferable, destination, and unfortunately, the corruption that then tends to happen is mainly twofold. It is born out of, that desperation, and which does not legitimize, that it should be done. But one would also believe that, it is not only South Africa that is targeted by this level of corruption. All destinations that are favorable, like the US and so forth, obviously face that. The doorkeeper to that, and which is the most important aspect, is then to say, how do officials deal with this kind of situation, as we have seen that, quite a number of officials actually, have to deal with this. And maybe one of the issues that really did not come out, very strongly in the report is that, the issue of delays that take place, particularly, with the processing of visas. I mean, you would notice that for quite a number of years, over a decade now, the department has been putting directives to try and cope with, the delays that are taking place there. And I am sure that the bulk of these delays are not because, the department really is understaffed, but they are calculated to create bottlenecks that then force, the people that are making applications to be channeled to the, non-formal, the corrupt system where they have to go and pay to try and expedite. As we have seen that some people, their visas seem to be out on the 21st, and on the 22nd, money is coming in. Because every time when you deal with people that are making applications, you hear people talking about, that they've got to push, they've got to speak with people that are pushing for their papers to come out. So we have got indeed, a coordinated, corrupt system that has got very two willing parties that are interested in making sure that they can corrupt the whole system. And unfortunately, the deserving people that come and make applications and try to follow the process, they are the ones that end up waiting for 5 up to 10 years in order for them either to get their asylum seeker processed or to get their visas, finally processed. But those that are willing to pay the money, they don't wait, for a longer period of time. And that is where the big problem really lies.
Jacinta, I see you shaking your head there. I mean, Dr. Sibanda is talking about South Africa being a favorable destination, and that sometimes out of desperation, corruption could be born out of that, even though he does say it does not legitimize some of these actions, but also emphasizing that there are two willing parties in this equation.
Look, I think what Dr. Sibanda is saying echoes exactly what our problem is as March and March, is that people want to give fancy names to all kinds of weird things. First of all, why do people who have problems in their country end up being a problem to other people's countries? This is the biggest problem that I have with the people like Dr. Sibanda, because he is talking about an African diaspora, but now he's not talking about solutions for Africa. He's talking about bringing people to South Africa and making them comfortable with getting documentations to stay in South Africa. How is that going to fix Africa? If you're talking about a diaspora, you're not talking about South Africa. You're not talking about Africans being integrated into South Africa and getting documents, etc., etc. What else does their organization have to offer for Africans to thrive in their African countries? And I think this is a conversation that he and others need to be honest with themselves about, that it's clear now that South Africans are no longer comfortable, are no longer happy with other Africans, especially coming into their country, because we're so nearby. You just walk in, you cross the border, you disrespect our country, you keep it in a very different state to how we know it. You bring different weird kind of cultures and all kinds of things that we are not comfortable with. And it has nothing to do with hatred that the likes of Dr. Sibanda like putting out there so that they can become victims. But it has everything to do with us as South Africans protecting ourselves. If you go to people who are veterinarians or people who work with animals, they will tell you how they protect certain animals and how they keep them from being extinct by separating them from other animals and allowing them to reproduce. Now, we find ourselves in a situation where we're saying that we're no longer comfortable with this inbreeding that's happening because we're losing our identity as well, on top of everything else. Is it not wrong for us to want to maintain who we are by keeping our culture, our religion, our integrity, our surnames, our heritage, etc., for ourselves? And the rest of Africa can do that same thing for themselves.
So before I give you a moment to react there, Dr. Sibanda, because I also see you profusely shaking your head. If we go back to the issue, Jacinta, of this particular report, and this report showing two willing parties that are in place that allows for the corruption that we are seeing, where a foreign national is not willing to wait in that queue, as Dr. Sibanda had outlined, and would have the buying power to then bribe that official that is sitting at the border. How are we as South Africans also taking accountability for those officials that are sitting in those places in ensuring that the corruption doesn't even begin there in the first place?
All right, so Katleho, you know, the nice thing about this conversation is that I've just made reference to our very first memorandum that we sent to the Department of Home Affairs. And on top of the list of things that we had demanded, right at the top, was for there to be an audit of their internal structures. And that means that their very own employees and people who have influence, because within the employees, some are complaining that they're getting a lot of pressure from government officials to do certain things for them, for their friends, etc., etc. This is something that we're getting from the officials themselves. So that was on top of the list of things that we had complained about. And what we're saying is we're not absolving South Africans from any blame. We blame South Africans all the time. If you would know this, we even have a campaign currently that is encouraging people to open cases against South Africans that are aiding and abetting illegal immigrants. But we're saying that foreigners themselves are not innocent. And the biggest problem here is that everybody wants to make people coming from all kinds of places seem like they are the victims. And we as South Africans must automatically just be okay with it, or else you're going to label us as xenophobic. All of them are the same. You come into a country illegally, you're a criminal. You're not someone who must be romanticized and treated with child gloves so that you can feel better and feel like you are loved. If you want love, go back home. That's the best place where you can get love.
So, Dr. Sibanda, I mean, a number of issues being raised here. You raised the issue that because the corruption exists within the South African borders, it then opens a leeway for this exchange between those that are coming into the country and those that are allowing it. When we spoke to the SIU spokesperson, Kaiser Khanyago, he in fact said of those that are being investigated and arrested now, it's a very small number of these officials. But he did emphasize that there are those at the borders themselves that are allowing for this kind of practice. Now, Jacinta is saying, before we even start speaking about bringing people into the country and ensuring that they're in the country in a particular way, what is the diaspora doing within those communities to ensure that the countries of which the people are coming from are giving better to those people before they even consider South Africa as a destination of choice?
Look, I think the challenge that Ms. Ngobese-Zuma is actually having is that we're not really addressing, the problem that is raised by the report. Because if we were going to be looking at the fact that now we are talking about why do we have, this corruption, basically taking place. Now, what Ms. Ngobese is obviously trying to advance are her personal, beliefs of, a right-wing theory of saying you can, close South Africa, maybe to foreigners and where they come from or Africans so that they can fix their problems. And which is something that all countries in the world, by the way, first world countries, countries that have got better resources, are faced with the same kind of problem of an influx, of migrants. That is why we talk of a serious Mediterranean problem. That is why we talk about, migration being so huge in America. The issue is that the people that are then, tasked with making sure that they control, the coming and going out of people, need to make sure that they can deal with the criminals that want to corrupt the system, because the buck stops with them. The ethical requirements, the commitment, the mere fact that somebody is paid a salary to do certain work means that they must be satisfied with their work. They will come across many, many types of criminal activities that they must, they must see from a distance. They must be able to decipher, investigate, and see that, okay, this is criminal, this is not genuine, this is legitimate. But the problem that we have, and which I said, it's unfortunate that the SIU has not picked that. It is specifically the fact that you've got people, you've got a system that is clogged. And the clogging of the system at the Department of Home Affairs is not by mistake. It is something that is calculated to ensure that people then end up not following the formal process of making applications, because then people are going to go and use the route where they are going to pay money, because it appears as if the department is broken, the system is broken. I believe that the system that the department has is very, it's quite rigorous, but it is for the people that are working within the system, that are corrupting that system, that are doing it for their own benefit. And yes, we hear that this is a very small number of people, but wait until you get to the border and you see people coming in and coming out, and see that people that are entitled to get, for example, 30 days, to come into the country, or to get 90 days to come into the country, they will be given 5 or 6 days despite what they request, until they pay money. Then they are given the number of days that they are supposed to be paying. So the level of corruption is very vast, unfortunately. And as it were, the level of corruptors as well is very vast, because people are desperately coming from these countries that are so broken, like what Ms. Ngobese is saying, that what exactly is happening there, which I think that is a discussion for another day, to deal with the problems that Africa has, that has got these push factors that get people coming into South Africa. But the issue is that because Africa has got such vast problems, and as a result, people will want to come into here, that does not mean that, then people can easily find access into the country. If the systems are rigorous, thorough, and followed to the letter, can you imagine somebody going into a Home Affairs, into Home Affairs offices with somebody to go and put in their fingerprints, so that their face, and details can then be put on a passport? That would not happen if the officials were basically doing their work without the intention of allowing, the corruption. So what we are really looking at here is a situation where we are saying both parties are guilty of the corruption that is there. But to start with, we must be very alert to the fact that people that are corruptors, people that want to commit crime, they are all over, and they will keep coming. But the system, if it is rigorous, manned by people that want to serve and do their duty diligently, then this problem is going to be lessened, in a very huge way. So if we see that the people, if you look at, for example, the agents, the people that are agents, that agents are out there. There are a lot of agents. Go to VFS, go anywhere where people make applications. There are too many agents that sit there and wait. Those people don't know anything about, making these applications. All what they know is to collect people's documents, because they've got somebody on the inside that they are working with, that they are actually, a gang or an organized, unit that they are working together in order to get this document processed. So what basically happens is, you get people that are intermediaries, that are working with people inside, so you don't get the people inside. And that's where all the corruption comes in. Get rid of these agents, or get them properly registered, so that if there is anything that is amiss, they are taken to task, they are arrested as well, and the law is seen to be taking basically its course. And then you'll realize that the bulk of this corruption is going to come down very hectically, heavily.
Dr. Sibanda, you say that the level of corruptors and those that are involved in the corruption is quite vast. And if we're looking at a case of borders where people are coming into South Africa, the starting point would also be from the exit country in which they are coming from. What role do you think those countries need to play because when you're leaving a country, it starts there before you enter into South Africa? Do you think there's adequate systems within the exit countries themselves that would stop the corruption at that level before the entry into South Africa?
For starters, there is corruption as well in the countries where they exit from. But you remember that now the exiting country does not have a responsibility to control people going out of its own country, because they allow people, to go out. But for countries like, Zimbabwe, that are joining countries, and maybe, Mozambique to a certain extent, that allow people coming from other countries, they allow these people in some cases as, people in transit. And therefore, their role is just to check that the person did not overstay in their own country without documentation at all, which means that they also pay their way from those countries to enter into South Africa should they come through, the borders. So the level of corruption is coming, from all these countries. The problem that we have when it comes to corruption is that I think we need to have an introspection as Africans, especially when it comes to the level of corruption that, we basically, entertain. And that is the major reason why, maybe as a continent, development has become such a problem, because we are not committed. We, when we talk of patriotism, unfortunately, patriotism is what, Miss Ngobese, thinks it is, to stand and say, I'm defending, I don't want people coming into my country. That is not patriotism. Patriotism is basically saying that it's not about just hatred, it is about serving. And when you serve, you've got laws. And if the laws are not working, you campaign properly and make sure that those laws are basically changed, not to go out and misdirect people and rally people to do things that are basically unlawful, because that is what we are running away from. Okay. We don't do things properly as Africans. We always want the shortcut. And then we defend ourselves and say, well, look, we don't love ourselves because we talk bad about, our systems. Even our leaders, they go out and say, look, when people speak about how broken the systems are, they say that those people that speak like that are people that are bored by the worst, that want to trash, Africa. We should be saying Africa is doing quite well.
Right.
When we've got such internal
Sibanda.
hemorrhaging that is taking place as a result of greed.
We are running out of time, Dr. Sibanda. I just want to get in the last thoughts from Jacinta. I mean, Dr. Sibanda speaks about those clogged systems at Home Affairs. He speaks about the role of government that is not protecting our borders, and the lack of patriotism also just of those that are supposed to be at the guards of our borders. What do you think we need to do as South Africans, Jacinta, as a starting point in order for us to be able to start curbing this corruption and the impact that we are seeing by the porous borders?
Look, Katleho, first of all, I'm going to sit here in utter shock that I have to listen to a man who came from his country to come and tell me about patriotism when he probably doesn't even do a thing about his own country that's about to change the constitution and allow for 2030 to happen. I've never heard Mr. Sibanda say a single thing to try and stand up for the people of Zimbabwe and stand up for his country. So he's the last person to tell me about patriotism and how I should exercise patriotism in my country. I'm not the one on a Zimbabwean national television platform fighting to get other South Africans documented in Zimbabwe, first of all. Second of all, Mr. Sibanda, my surname is Zuma. I'm Mrs. Zuma to you. And lastly, well, not lastly, but second to last, Mr. Sibanda, you are sitting here telling us about all kinds of corruption that's happening at Home Affairs. But have you ever for once reported that corruption? Because seemingly you know all the ins and outs. So if this report of SIU did not come out, when are we going to hear all these revelations that you know, Mr. Sibanda? It shows that you know and you're part of the system that is enabling all this corruption to happen, but you're not going to stop it because it enables Zimbabweans to leave their country and come here and reap our country and take off all our resources to benefit you as Zimbabweans. And you're not going to stand up for Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe because you don't have the guts to. That's why you only have guts here in South Africa, because you know that when you're in Zimbabwe, you're small cats. Also, Mr. Sibanda, let me tell you, for the longest time we've been saying to you that there are too many illegal immigrants in this country, and you are busy telling us about ZDPs and all these refugee statuses, etc., etc. Now, do you consider a person that has fraudulently occupied and received documents to be in South Africa a person who is legally in the country? Of course not. That person is an illegal immigrant, and you Mr. Sibanda, are also involved in that corruption. Why are you not telling Katleho that you also are trending and you are in the newspaper and in the news for fraudulently getting documents to be in South Africa? Now you've got a television platform that allows you to speak, and you think that you have been accused of standing up and admitting that you also went into that system and corruptly entered into South Africa. Why are you not telling the truth, Mr. Sibanda? Being on television must not absolve you from the truth of who you are.
Right.
And you are a Zimbabwean that's running away from who you really are, and that is a person that is in the country fraudulently but has been given platforms to speak, and you're using that to paint yourself as a victim. You are not a victim. You are part of the corrupt system, and you're not helping this country in any way. You need to go back to Zimbabwe and fix it for yourself and for your children and their future.
On a broader spectrum, Jacinta, how do we solve the problems that are faced by the millions of South Africans that is impacted by what this SIU report has now put out?
First of all, we solve the problems by not allowing Zimbabweans to tell us what to do in our country. It's our country, and therefore we need to know and say what's best for us. Second to that, we have departments and we have things like the SIU and the Hawks, which we're very happy that finally they've come up with this report and come out with it. Because when we met them for the first time, they did tell us that they are on to a report and they're waiting for a report from the SIU. This is what we were told from the Department of Home Affairs. And we are very happy to finally see it materialize, because we'd also been told that there's a lot of pastors who are mostly Nigerian, who are in the country committing all kinds of crime. And we're just asking for this to happen at a faster pace, because these people are organized. And the more organized they are, the more dangerous they are. So they're obviously not going to take it lightly, the fact that they are now being uncovered, they are now being seen and shown to the world for exactly who they are, because all along they've been victims and South Africans have been the xenophobic ones. But now that card is not even working to the rest of the world, because they are being exposed for exactly who they are.
Right.
And we need to, as South Africans ourselves, stop renting to these people. Stop buying from them. Stop keeping them in our homes. And to the women, stop marrying them. It starts with you.
Okay.
Every single decision that you make will impact the future of this country.
We certainly are running over time. Dr. Sibanda, just want to give you the last 30 seconds to give us your closing remarks and just how you find this impacting South Africa's relations with legitimate diaspora communities.
Well, look, starting from what the previous minister did, you will remember that I think for quite some time, the minister had put a moratorium of some sort on permanent residents and then investigations into what exactly has been going on. So we've seen the previous minister, taking quite a stance in trying to investigate this. And we've seen a number of officials, being arrested. We've also seen a number of foreign nationals like, the Omotosas and the Shepherd Bushiris that have been gotten. So one wants to believe that, a number of these activities that are taking place to try and curb. And we also see what has come in, especially with the digitization, of Home Affairs, which is going to help in a very huge way to make sure that, once people's biometrics are captured, one is hopeful that even the level of corruption might come down, and this will increase the efficiency of the department and assist in ensuring that, obviously there is a curb into this, because then that will, obviously improve the relations, because the relations between, amongst Africans, South Africans and the broader Africa is relatively very negative because of this level of corruption. So if we see, positive steps like, those reports, the SIU steps that are being taken place and the improvements that we see in the department, one becomes hopeful that gradually that will decrease the level of dispute, particularly as a result of corruption and fraudulent migration, and certainly that is going to probably mend to a huge extent these relations.
All right. Jacinta, Dr. Sibanda, thank you so much for your time. There certainly needs to be a lot more conversations, but most importantly, action that needs to be taken on both ends in South Africa and the rest of the continent, so that we're not seeing ourselves sitting with these issues that are affecting the everyday lives of those that are on the ground. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. All right. When we return, we'll bring you more stories after this, so do stay with us.